helping students and healthcare professionals not just survive, but thrive with a purpose. This is the CMDA Student Pulse podcast with your host, Bill Reichart, National Director of CMDA Campus Ministries.
Well, welcome to another episode of CMDA's Student Pulse podcast. I'm Bill Reichart, National Director for our campus and community ministries here at CMDA, and I'm really grateful to have Kayla Grooters. Kayla, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I was really excited to get to have the time to do this.
Well, I was excited. Well, first of all, I met you at the National Convention, and we had a chance to interact a bit because you were doing a VIE poster presentation. And then I'm in Michigan at a Midwest conference, and you're there with a bunch of students, and you shared your story and testimony. I just thought was so powerful and deliciously subversive. I don't know. I liked your tenacity. I liked the way you address things head on with courage and with a strong abiding faith in Christ, and the work you're doing with the student chapter there. I just thought we need to have your story on this podcast, and so thank you for being a part of this time and to have a conversation.
Sure.
So let me just give a little backdrop, although I want you to fill in the blanks a little bit, Kayla. You're a third-year medical student at Western Michigan. You're an Ohio kid, though, so I don't know how you found yourself up in Michigan. That's pretty dangerous territory.
I crossed the line, I know. My dad still loves me, though, because I didn't go to that school.
Okay, fair enough. You did, your undergrad work. You were involved with Crew, which I think is really cool. I was on staff with Crew, and you met your now husband through Crew, and I met my wife there. So, Crew is just a great place to meet spouses.
That needs to go in an ad for Crew. That will definitely increase campus involvement.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about your faith journey, just moving forward in our time together. So how did you come to faith in Christ? Tell us a little bit about your journey spiritually.
So I honestly believe that I first came to know the Lord, or at least have a concept of sin, around the age of 3 years old. Mm-hmm. When I moved to West Michigan, a lot of people started asking me on what day did you get saved? Mm-hmm. And I can't particularly really remember, but I can remember the moment where things kind of clicked for me that I had the capacity to do something wrong. And so it was around Christmas time. I was in the kitchen, and my mom had this tendency of putting Christmas cards. She would tape them up against the pantry door so you could see the outside of the card. And as people mailed in the Christmas cards, obviously more and more would appear on the door. And there was one particular card. It was a portrait of Mary holding the baby Jesus, and it was painted in this very modernistic style. And in my 3-year-old mind, I thought it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. It was no baby actually looks like this. This is completely wrong. This is not the Christmas scene that I understand all Christmas scenes should look like. And I guess I went to try to explain my problems with this card to my mom. But instead of saying that the card looked ugly, I ended up saying the worst thing a 3-year-old knows how to say, which is I thought that the baby Jesus looked stupid. And I immediately, before my mom could even respond, I think she was drying her hair in the bathroom, I started bawling. I started crying. I was I know that whatever I've just done is wrong. And I felt awful about it. And so I asked my mom, I'm so sorry that I said that. And she looked at me and she said, you don't need to apologize to me. You need to apologize to him. And that was the very first time this idea of repenting for a sin ever came to my mind. And so I ran into my room and I curled up on my bed, and I remember what I prayed. It was just Lord Jesus, I'm really sorry, and I don't think you're stupid. And that was the best I could do. But I think looking back, that memory has just never left. And so even though my faith journey has really twisted and turned over the years. And, I grew up, I was a really nerdy kid. I loved reading. I was really into politics even at a young age. And I kind of got myself in trouble because I would read philosophy, got attracted with all of the types of things that an angsty teenager might get attracted to. I had friends who were, nihilists and atheists and agnostics and humanists. And I kind of ping-ponged through all of these different ideas, or how do I relate belief in God with science? So I went through all those twists and turns, but fundamentally, a knowledge of the truth of Jesus Christ never left me. Mm-hmm. And I thank God for that. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up in a really small church. I went to a church, a congregation with maybe 25 people, and I was one of the only young people there, one of the only kids there. And I would go away to church camp where I'd meet a few other kids in this particular very tiny denomination. And I realized that most of them, I loved them to death, but most of them were there for a vacation. Mm-hmm. There really wasn't a feeling, at least a feeling of commitment to the Lord that lasted after you walked outside of those doors. But then when I moved for college, when I arrived at Grand Valley, suddenly, and I was, again, not from West Michigan, I didn't really know about the culture of this place, and I was going to a public university, but I was surrounded by super active Christian ministries. Mm-hmm. There were probably 5 or 6 Christian groups on campus that were all competing and vying for people's attention. And because I was living in the Honors College dorms, I ended up attending the Honors College Crew chapter, which was incredible and also really challenging because I was surrounded by some of the smartest people I'd ever met that were taking faith so seriously. We weren't just reading the Bible, but the leader there was breaking down the Greek, and she was comparing and contrasting different parts of the New and Old Testament. She was bringing in all of these challenging ideas that I had never explored. And honestly, I was like, I didn't realize it was this deep. But because I had always loved philosophy and ethics, I was like, well, I can really love this. I can really get into an appreciation for the word. And I think that's propelled me to where I am today.
Yeah, you're realizing that to be a Christ follower, you don't have to check your brain at the door. It's a reasonable faith. It's a reasoned faith, in fact. So were you discipled in Crew? I know, having been in Crew, both as a student and on staff, discipleship is such a big part. Were you discipled?
It is. It was a really unique walk for me because my first year, participating was almost overwhelming enough. And I realized, if I'm going to, move forward with this organization, there's just a lot that I'm going to learn. And I sought out some discipleship. I asked the leader of that particular Bible study if she would work with me, and she did. We went through the Psalms together. But I realized that I was seeking a more in-depth level of mentorship. Now, because of the denomination that I had been a part of, and honestly, because of just my lack of knowledge of how progressive that denomination was, and honestly, the people on Crew, they had some concerns for me that I wasn't even aware of genuine Christian doctrine. And it kind of took 2 years of, I'll almost say, proving myself, but also detangling a lot of things, figuring out what genuine Christian doctrine actually is and what are the non-negotiables. So after that process, I was formally discipled. I became a student leader, and the rest is history.
Stay with us. More Student Pulse podcast in just a moment. If you haven't registered for the 2025 CMDA National Convention, now is the time. Join us.
May 1st in historic St. Charles, Missouri on the banks of the Missouri River. With easy highway and airport access, this location says, convenience. This year's beautiful accommodations are on the premises with the convention hall, but boasts nearby high-end hotels and B&Bs. Since there is limited time to save your spot, right now is the perfect time to register and join over 1,000 of your colleagues and community this May. See you there.
And having interacted on the several occasions that we have, I've noticed you've integrated well your faith in your life. It's you don't bifurcate those things. They seem to be, your faith is an integral part of your life, and especially now, so as a medical student. But before we get there, let's just talk about why you went to medical school. You said philosophy was something that really got you going. You thought that was something that maybe you were thinking you'd pursue an academic career. What made you think of medicine? What led you into that trajectory?
It's such a crazy story, and I really think it's a good example of God's providence, that when you tell God the last thing that you will do is go into medicine, he will bring you there if he desires it.
You got to use reverse psychology, Kayla. I'm just kidding.
No, coming out of high school, I was the top student, and I won an award for it. I was the top student in my class for English, and I was the top student in my class for history. And my dad was like, you are missing your calling as a lawyer. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to go into law. I took Latin American studies courses. I was a part of the ethics bowl team at Grand Valley, and I competed on the national ethics bowl team down at Atlanta for 2 years in a row, and that was wonderful. But I kept feeling a pull towards science. I'd always liked science. I had always been really interested in solving problems. And honestly, the paperwork side of law started to become less appealing. The bureaucracy and I wanted to make a real difference, and I felt like that wasn't going to be the best way that I could do it. And so I picked microbiology as my major with the intention of going down a research career. I wanted to get my PhD. I picked microbiology because my assumption was, even with a bachelor's in microbiology, I can get a job. I don't want to get a degree that's not going to leave me unemployable. And I started working in research labs. My sister had actually passed away when I was 3 years old from a genetic disease, and I really started getting this idea in my head that I was going to become a type of scientist that works with gene therapy or works with pharmaceuticals or cures diseases. Because in my mind, doctors didn't fix stuff because they hadn't fixed her, right? The cures, someone else comes up with them, and then doctors use them. And so I kind of had that binary in my head. I'm like, well, I want to be on the side of science. I went out, I got my dream internship out at the University of Iowa. I basically had a PhD offer, and I hated it. I loved the research in that lab, but the environment I was in, the lack of human interaction, the slow train that it takes to actually get something from the bench to the bedside, it was driving me crazy. And in the back of my mind, it was like God was always saying, you'd be really good in medicine. Like, you keep passing this up. So I decided to take a job. This was right at the start of COVID, in a nursing home. I worked as a CNA, or a certified nursing assistant. Really, 2 reasons. Was one of the only places that was hiring a lot during COVID. And secondly, I was like, if I'm going to even try to go down this medical path, then I better get some clinical experience just in case. And I really liked the interactions that I had with my residents. I loved the human side when these people were so isolated and so alone. They had no visitors, and yet through the simple acts of human touch, I was able to minister to them in such a special and important way. And I think that's kind of when the wheels started turning, if I really need to heavily consider doing medicine. At the same time, I had met my now husband, my boyfriend, Andrew, through Crew, but he was in Crew at Western Michigan. And he's the one who mentioned to me that Western had a medical school. I didn't even realize that. And then he told me that there was an announcement somewhere on the website that there's a early decision partnership between my school and Western. Okay. And so I could apply to just one school a year early and have a guaranteed acceptance. Or if that didn't work out, I could figure out what else I wanted to do. And I was like, all right, God, I'll do exactly what your parents tell you not to do. I'll put all my eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And if you want me to be a doctor, then I'll get in, right? That should be that simple. And by his providence, I did.
Yeah.
And it was glorious because by getting in a year early, I was able to graduate early and then spend the next year, instead of applying, I was able to serve as a cross-cultural worker over in Spain. And so that was a really special time in my life as well.
Oh, that's great. Now, doing that cross-cultural work, you said that was a special time. What was special about that?
So I worked along El Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage trail in northern Spain. And I worked out of a food truck and a cafe, ministering to the pilgrims who come from all across the world to walk this trail. And now, while the Camino has some obvious Catholic roots, I'd say about 80% of the people who come and walk it are doing it more of a bucket list thing, to be vaguely spiritual, to overcome an obstacle in their life. And so there's a lot of open hearts. The nations are literally brought to your doorstep and they're poured into this 500-kilometer stretch where every single person walking there is like super open to spirituality. It's just the nature of being in this place. So it's a really beautiful way to meet people, to talk to people, to talk to them like, what do you know about this place? Why are you here? And, what does the way mean to you? What is the path? And who's at the end of the path? And that's kind of how we would always point people towards, at the end of this physical path, yes, is the Cathedral of St. James, is the Compostela, is victory, is bragging rights, is whatever you want to call it. But really at the end of our eternal path are the arms of Christ. And you can choose to walk into them and he'll never deny you. While I can romanticize it a lot, and I have a lot of amazing memories, I also saw some of the dark side of the world. This is a place where there's a lot of vulnerable people. I'll never forget, we were closing up the cafe one night, and I walk out and a woman comes wandering down the street. She's trying to smoke a cigarette and she's literally burning her face with it, and she falls straight into my arms crying. And her trafficker pops out of the bar yelling for me to return her, this 60 or 70-year-old guy saying that this teenage girl is his girlfriend, right? And over the course of a couple days, we, dealing with the police and hospitals, accompanying this woman I had never met, with her passed out on my lap in the back of a police car, to the Women and Children's Hospital in Pamplona for her to get a rape exam. I mean, the most traumatic experience you could possibly imagine in this beautiful place. We're sitting in the hospital, and the doctors, they all come out, to talk to me, because she wanted me with her. And they're like, why are you doing this? Like, you don't know her. Like what compelled you to put yourself through this situation for this woman? And I'll never forget the doctor. She looked at me and she's like, are you a Catholic? And I smiled. And I didn't really respond, but I just said, this is how I'd want someone to treat me, and this is how I believe Christ would treat all of us. So I carried that memory kind of back with me as motivation for, as much as I loved the work I was doing there, this is not the end of the story. There's a much larger purpose that God has for me. And I think a purpose that can only be fulfilled, at least as far as my knowledge, through being a physician.
Well, part of being a physician is you're not just solving problems, you're dealing with people and their stories, and you got a chance to see the human side of certainly a tragic situation, but that there are people are going to be sitting across from you, or in the clinic, or in the exam room, or wherever it may be. So it's definitely, I think it's going to make you a better future physician as you carry those memories and those experiences, and having engaged in the way you have. So this is all leading up to medical school. You get into Western Michigan. You show up. Is there a CMDA? Were you able to find Christian fellowship there? How easy or hard was that to do?
It was incredibly hard my first year. There was a CMDA listed on the website as a student interest group.
Yeah.
But as far as I could tell,
yeah,
they maybe met on Zoom maybe twice a year, and I never ended up tracking down a single member of it.
Yeah.
So the short answer was no. There was no active Christian fellowship on our campus.
So what do you? Let me guess. What do? You start one?
Well, I'd love to say that from day one, I was like, yes, we're doing this. This is a need.
Yeah.
But honestly, that first year, you're just so overwhelmed. You're taking more classes than you've ever taken. People are throwing all this information that you have to memorize, and you're just constantly feeling like the stupidest person on earth as you're surrounded by the smartest people you've ever met. And it actually took about a year before we decided that this was a need, that no one else was going to step up and do it. And in addition to the desperate need for fellowship on our campus, because Zoom had completely changed how medical school worked. Most of our lectures were online. I was one of 5 people sitting in a lecture hall out of a class of 84. There was never anything going on. The library was empty. They were just like, who are these students? I see them in anatomy lab and I see them on test day. And that's pretty much it. And so I could tell there was a hunger for just some community in any form. But also the direction that some of our events were going was so antithetical to a Christian perspective. The required events that we did have to actually show up for were all based in DEI talking points or seminars that were intended to divide us, or a mandatory lecture on, how to perform an abortion. Like, it was like, this is what we're valuing to actually bring the whole class together. And it was heavy. It was a very heavy time. And I realized that there was going to be no one else who was going to make the space for people who had an opposing viewpoint, Christian or not Christian. And I had to be the one to do it. And so I kind of leaned in on the few contacts I had made. I kind of knew the few other people who saw the world the same way as I did. And that group of 5, we became the original co-leaders. And now our chapter is flourishing.
Like, well, let's see, now you're 3rd year, so you kind of moved on from direct leadership. You say flourishing, I mean, just what kind of engagement are you seeing?
Yeah, so at our last summer kickoff barbecue, we had over 50 people. Wow. We have spouses. We have faculty. We have the lady who sits at the front desk in student affairs.
Yeah.
She came and she brought her kids. Wow. We have students who I know aren't even Christian who have showed up to our fall. One of the girls that is now a current leader Rachel, her family has a farm. We went out there. We had hot cider and a bonfire, and that pulled so many people. And now the bi-weekly, and now actually under the current student leaders, weekly Bible studies easily get 20 people each time.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine from where we started. Again, with 5 people sitting in a classroom wondering if this was ever going to work.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, it did not take that long. I mean, it seemed like, even though it seemed like there was a void, apparent void, I think underneath the surface was a latent kind of desire. I think you spoke into it, a need, a hunger for community, a relationship, connection, and as a Christ follower, support. Because as you mentioned, it is not a very affirming and generous environment when it comes to those who happen to be Christ followers. And so you need the support. You need to know you're not alone, right? You've got others that you're working alongside of that are shoulder to shoulder with you in this, and I think that makes a world of difference. And that's going to let me dovetail into what I want to talk about next, because you were given an assignment
Yes.
as a group. Well, actually, I'm going to just let you tell the story because you told it so well at the retreat. Go ahead, speak into this ceremony and the oath and everything that you were asked to do.
Yes. So a trend in medical schools, I know we're not the only one who's taken this on, is to have students write their own oath rather than pledge the Hippocratic Oath. And the process that WMed decided to use to have this oath written was, we're divided into large, like, fourths. So they split the class into 4 groups of 20-something. And then in those 4 groups, they were supposed to elect 2 representatives. And then that would create a panel of 8 people total to write the oath. And around the same time, videos were circulating of these student-written oaths at other institutions that were honestly pretty dystopian, completely devoid of the basic principles of the Hippocratic Oath that for 100, 200 plus years, well, thousands of years if you truly go back, but at least in the American medical institutions, a couple hundred years, have been perfectly fine. And now in these newer versions, you saw them lacking such basic tenets as stating a pledge to do no harm, right? So I quickly realized that this oath was a tipping point in deciding what type of environment and what type of school I was going to attend. And so I realized that I needed to get myself nominated in my little group to be one of those oath writers. What I didn't bank on was that the same type of people all sought the same thing. And so when we gathered together to write this oath, I'm looking around wondering, okay, it's going to be me against 7 people who, don't want to include do no harm, but absolutely want to include a pledge about equity. And what I found was the exact opposite. Of them, there was really only one person who was on that more progressive side, and the rest of us were able to use this opportunity to really create an oath that pledges to the essential values of medicine, of autonomy, of fostering a true relationship based out of respect, of doing no harm. And so it was through that experience that I met those people who later became my CMDA co-leaders. I realized that they were willing to put themselves on the line. They were willing to, because we had to announce that we were the oath writers during white coat ceremony. And then obviously the entire class read our oath.
For the first time.
Obvious.
Did they not see it in advance? They're reading it for the first time at the white coat ceremony?
We sent it back, and the students got to vote if they accepted it or not. We did have some students not accept it in its first rendition, so we had to revise a little bit, but we were adamant on what we weren't going to take out. And I think by the end we had a unanimous acceptance.
Okay.
But of course the faculty and then everyone, donors and who else comes to the white coat ceremony, they first got to hear it as we pledged it.
Stay with us. More Student Pulse podcast in just a moment.
Well, I imagine the faculty had not expected this oath to go into. Oh, I like your mug, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I imagine the faculty were a little surprised in the direction that this oath went because they know handing it. It's funny. I mean, we're supposed to pledge in these oaths it's supposed to be aspirational beyond ourselves, something that we can aspire to, something that we can look toward. But when we're the ones creating it, we're limited in what we're able to imagine and to commit to, and it's just a backward way of going about it. And yet, they task you as students doing this, probably expecting the similar kind of outcomes as other schools, as you mentioned, were doing. So, how did the faculty respond?
I have to give applause to our faculty and to our staff who, through this entire process, have generally been incredibly supportive of students, even students with diverse or less common opinions like myself. I think that's one of the reason that we have faculty showing up to our meetings at our school. And that even with certain faculty members who I know are probably polar opposite in their belief system, I still have a great relationship with them. Now, I will say I think that our class definitely came with a different spirit maybe than some classes before us. And what's incredible about that is that by doing this, we're altering the culture and kind of connotation of the school to attract people who kind of jive with the same things. I think one of the smartest things that we did, or that I did, that helped grow the CMDA chapter was I worked on the interview panels, and I gave tours of the school to prospective students. And so if they asked me, hey, what are you involved in? I talked up CMDA as much as I possibly could, even when we weren't really doing that much.
Yeah.
And there were people who decided to come to our school who remembered that.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important for people to realize, again, that there are others like themselves who believe the same things. It's but then again, there has to be that first person like you and the other others who stepped into that project and to write that oath. I mean, you were risking something. You were saying, well, first of all, you're saying, listen, we can either complain about the outcome, or we can actually do something about it. And with that comes some exposure, some risk. Like you said, you thought you'd be you against the seven others on the team. So I just think that's such a great witness to others as they're facing, and not to minimize people's situations, because I know, as you've already said, it's not always a very affirming and welcoming. It can be a hostile situation for a Christ follower within med school. But stepping into it full of faith, like a Daniel, and just and trusting the Lord in the middle of that, and just how God has blessed. I mean, He's blessed your faithfulness. He's blessed that step of faith, and now you say 50 or so students are showing up for a beginning of the year barbecue or something. I mean, it's and that's really within a year turnaround if you think about it, because you, like you said, the first year was kind of a wash. You were just trying to get your bearings,
Survive.
So that's incredible, and just again, all glory goes to the Lord. Obviously, He's the one who's at work and providentially working through our efforts as they are. As you know, as a leader yourself. As you know, the audience of this podcast is typically students, although people listen, and I'm always surprised. I think there was an attending at the conference we were at that says, "Yeah, I listen to podcasts." I'm like, "Great! I mean, you're not our target audience, but I'm glad you're listening." And what would you say to other students? What would you say to those in leadership? How can you? What would you say to encourage them to press on, to persevere, to have the tenacity needed to continue to be faithful when they may be feeling like, you know, they're just kind of alone, wanting to throw in the towel?
I think the first thing that I'd do is I'd remind them of one of my favorite verses, which is Esther 4:14. I'll give only this ending part of it, but it's perhaps you've been risen to such a point of royal dignity for such a time as this, right? Mordecai is talking to Esther about how she doesn't have to be the one who's going to risk her life to approach the king to save her people. If she doesn't, God will put someone else there. But she has been given this opportunity for a reason. And I would say to these students, you've been put in your particular school, no matter how your school leans, for a reason. You were accepted there for a reason. And there are more people than you'd ever imagine who will join you, but someone's got to take the first step. It's scary. And the first step doesn't always have to be drastic. It doesn't always have to involve a really dramatic display, standing up against something. Oftentimes the first step is just committing to meeting. Committing that we're going to gather some people together for dinner, for a Bible study, for a bonfire, and to figure out where's the interest, where's the feelers. You know, I look at, oftentimes there are kind of obvious meeting points that aren't being capitalized on. So the Midwest Conference, for instance, when I became a third year and became one of the two Michigan State student representatives, well, the year before I had attended the Midwest Conference, I brought the other WMed leaders, and we quickly realized we were like the only students there.
You were.
Like, we're like, this is awesome. This is a weekend away to gather on a fun place that has a mini golf course and a beach. Why aren't students here, right? And you can comment. I really committed to advertising the butt out of that conference, and we brought in over 40 students, right? So in your area, what types of activities exist that you can use to gather a meeting? Is there a place where you guys can volunteer at together? Oftentimes schools require volunteer hours, like my school does, and they let you pick what organizations you want to use. I mean, are there crisis pregnancy centers? Are there church-affiliated food pantries? Are there, again, prayer nights that the community is hosting, or a Christian comedian coming into your town that you can just throw out a feeler of, we'd like to gather a group? I think that can be a really great way to start out.
I think that's a good word. I mean, I think that's a very powerful catalyst, is when people are on mission together, they're serving together, that really galvanizes community in a very special way. I imagine you felt that when you were doing your cross-cultural work in Spain. When you're in mission together, things happen, and it's you're serving others, you're Yeah, I think that is a powerful way, and everything you said is right. It doesn't always have to be flashy; it just needs to be faithful, and just step
Right.
into the opportunities as God opens those doors. Um, well, this has been a great conversation. I mean, I was just again, you lit up the room. I think you had some veterans at that retreat. I think one guy stood up and just was like, I don't know what he said, something like share more or something. He was animated, and you just got them out of their seats and it was you and Rachel, right? Rachel was
Yep.
sharing her own story too, and she's a second year at the
Yes.
school now too, and so both of you just sharing. You just an encouraging word of how God is at work on the campus, and to your point, there was only maybe a small group last year, but there were 40 students at the conference this past year. So just again, God is
Right.
blessing and pouring out his favor on the students in the ministry there and other schools in the area for 40 students. And I trust, like you experienced, others are going to say, why haven't we been doing this all along? Let's keep doing it and let's bring more students with us. And so I think you appreciate it as I think the veterans did, is just the cross-generational impact that an environment like that has, that you're able to rub shoulders with veterans and those who have been practicing medicine for years.
So important. It's so important to be able to show people, hey, there are attendings, there are people associated with residency programs that come to this, that are in this community that you can reach out to and ask your questions to. And I know people from my group were amazed at across so many different subspecialties. Like, are you interested in plastic surgery? We had a plastic surgeon there. Are you interested in OBG? We have attendings in that field there. I think the other thing, just to, go back to when you were talking about, Rachel, I got the opportunity to mentor Rachel a lot and kind of build her and the other M2 leaders up into the position they are now. And so that's the other, piece of advice I'd love to give to anyone thinking, can we start a chapter here, is really pick or find a younger student you can really pour into. Someone that wants to take this over when you can't, when you're too busy with interviews. Someone who's then going to mentor someone else the way that they were. Starting with nothing, we had to build that culture. But I've noticed that the things that we made the decision to do the first year are still being done the third year, because this chain just kind of now believes that this is what we do here.
Yeah, it's easy to set up traditions, isn't it? And but no, I think that's absolutely right. You want to be looking out for somebody who's going to step into that role, because it's pretty clear from the get-go that anybody who's a student leader is only going to take on that role for about a year, and then they've got to hand off the baton. So it's very true, very true. Well, I trust and believe you've left a legacy, as well as the students that have been around you to help launch or relaunch Western Michigan, and I know God's got some incredible things in store for you as you move forward. Do you have any sense of specialty, or is it too soon to say?
I am currently thinking about medicine pediatrics. Family med has been on the back burner as well. I really enjoyed all three of those rotations. I definitely see myself in a primary care type setting, or the only fellowship I've ever really considered is infectious disease. So still something that really equips me well for a future in global health, for a future in rural health and medicine. So yeah.
Well, you've got a network of other Christ followers that are, like you said, involved at every level of both the training experience and professional journey. I mean, CMDA it doesn't end when you graduate. It's a ministry,
No.
as you quickly found out at National Convention, that carries with a person throughout their entire professional career and beyond. So, very cool. Well, this has been great. I appreciate having this conversation, and for others to have heard a bit of that story that you you shared so well at the retreat about a month ago. So thank you, Kayla, for all you're doing. God bless you, and I know we're going to continue to bump into each other as I know you'll probably be at the next maybe national convention or two, and you did such a great you did a great job presenting, and I'll make a quick plug for that too. If you're thinking about coming to national convention, if you need a reason or excuse to present, do a poster.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all
I just
kinds of
submitted my abstract to present again, and I heavily advertise it to anyone who's even thinking about it. It's a great way if you've got a poster that you were thinking about taking to another conference. It's also a great way to get your feet wet with presenting it and rehearsing it. So if you need any more motivation to do so, that's my advice.
All right.
I hope to see you all there.
All right. Well, good. We'll see everyone there. Thank you, Kayla. We'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. CMDA's Student Pulse podcast is a production of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily endorsed by the organisation. CMDA is non-partisan and does not endorse political parties or candidates for public office. The views expressed on Student Pulse podcast reflect judgments regarding principles and values held by CMDA and its members.